whose tears baptized the grave he meant for himself? That was the question that claimed my breath the day I found Silas Creed digging his way into the afterlife. I was 17 that spring, a preacher's daughter, though my father had long since gone to dust. Still untouched by man, though not by grief. My hands had buried hope beside Mama 3 winters ago, and since then, I'd been wandering the cracked edges of Sandvale like a ghost in a girl's skin. Some girls dreamed of silk dresses or tender glances from a man across the church pew. I dreamed of being needed, of someone reaching for me not out of duty but longing, the kind of love that would crack open the quiet ache in my chest and make the world mean something again. I didn't expect to find that ache reflected in a stranger's shovel stroke. That day, the sun baked the hills like judgment. I'd taken Bellflower, our old mule, out past Baptism Hill, looking for water, where even the buzzards had stopped circling. That hill was once sacred. My father baptized sinners there in better years, when the creek still ran, and Sandvale hadn't choked on its own dust. I was near the ridge when I heard it. Steel biting earth, rhythmic, slow. Like a hymn sung without hope. I crept closer. That's when I saw him. A man waist deep in a grave of his own making. Broad-shouldered, sun-scarred, a line of sweat carving through the dirt on his back. His shirt clung to him soaked and torn at the collar. He moved with the steady patience of someone who'd already said goodbye to the world. Beside the grave lay a wooden cross. No flowers, no dates. Just 5 words carved with a knife, "Here lies a man who quit." I should have left. A good girl would have turned back. But I'd buried enough silence to know that some graves cry out louder than the living. "Sir," I called softly. "That hole meant for someone else or for you?" He paused. The shovel hung mid-air like an exhale. His eyes met mine, and Lord help me, they were the eyes of a man who'd seen too much fire and still burned. Gray-blue, like sky before lightning. "No one else left to dig it," he said, voice low and rough as gravel. He climbed out slow and deliberate like a soldier rising from a battlefield. Up close, he looked older than first glance. 40, maybe more. His face was carved by time jaw, unshaven, sun-worn lines along his mouth that made me wonder how often he used to smile. He didn't ask my name, just studied me the way a man studies thunderclouds with equal parts caution and recognition. "What brings a girl like you out here?" he asked. "Looking for water," I said. Didn't expect to find a man bearing his name. He gave a tired smirk. "Ain't much difference between thirst and dying some days." We stood there in the breathless air. I watched his hand twitch near the shovel, like it couldn't decide whether to dig or defend. Something about him made my heart beat louder. Not fear, not even desire, but a strange, quiet pull. Then I saw them. 5 shapes, small and slow-moving, staggering across the ridge. At first I thought coyotes had cornered something. Then I saw skin, dresses, hair tangled like weeds. Children, girls. The oldest couldn't have been more than my age. The smallest looked no bigger than a sack of corn. One of them carried a headless doll. Another had blood crusted down her shin. They stopped a few feet from the grave. Dust clung to their bodies like ash. The tallest stepped forward. Her voice was dry but not broken. "Mister, we need your help." He stiffened. "Ain't nothing here but dirt." "We know," she said. "But you're the only one for miles who isn't them." He narrowed his eyes. "Who's them?" "The men from the orphan house." I felt my spine go rigid. Everyone in Sandvale knew of the orphanage past Dry Rock Ridge. Judge Archibald Yates, ran it a man who wore Sunday silk and gave money to widows. But I'd heard the whispers too. Wagons that left in the dark. Children who disappeared without graves. The girl's lip trembled, but she didn't cry. They'll kill us if we go back. Creed stared at them, at the bruises on their arms, the cracked lips. The silence between them, the kind of silence that only came from terror too deep to name. I was supposed to be dead by sundown, he muttered. The youngest girl stepped forward, clutching her doll. Then maybe God sent us early. I saw it then, a flicker in Creed's eyes, something breaking, or maybe something trying to mend. He looked at the grave, then at the cross, then at the girls. And he didn't pick up the shovel again. That was the day Silas Creed stopped digging. And the day I started believing love might still find the broken not in church pews or letters from suitors, but in the cracked hands of a man too tired to keep dying. There are silences heavier than gunfire. The kind that press against your chest and ask, "Now what will you do?" When Eliza whispered the orphanage, that silence fell between us like dusk. And Silas Creed, the man who had been ready to bury himself minutes before, stood still like the desert wind had carved his bones in place. "Eliza," she said again, steady despite the tremor behind it. "That's my name. These are my sisters, Ruth, Beth, Lucy, and Alice." Alice couldn't have been more than 5, clutching a ragged doll with no face, its stuffing peeking out like secrets that refused to stay buried. Their dresses were torn, their arms scabbed, and their eyes. Lord, their eyes looked older than mine. I stepped in slowly. They didn't flinch. Children used to being hit don't flinch when someone reaches gently. Creed's voice cut through the stillness, low and scraping. "You said they'd kill you." Eliza nodded. "Judge Yates sent men. They'll be here soon." At that name, I felt something cold crawl down my spine. Judge Archibald Yates was the kind of man who made you question if hell ever closed its doors. Sandvale held him in high regard, but only because he built churches with the same money he used to buy silence. His orphanage past Dry Rock Ridge was spoken of in whispers, the kind that make mothers hold their children tighter. "What did you see?" Creed asked. Eliza hesitated, then reached inside her dress and pulled out something wrapped in a blood-stained strip of muslin. A journal no bigger than a man's palm, worn thin at the edges. She handed it to him like it weighed more than stone. "It was my mother's," she said. "She worked in records. When things started happening, she started writing them down." Creed opened it slowly, flipping through pages lined with small, tight script. Names, dates, numbers, places, transactions. She said if anything ever happened to her, we had to run west. Find someone who wasn't part of them. Alice whimpered behind her sister, and Beth pulled her close. I caught a glimpse of one page. It read, "Lucy sent to Helena. No return. Paid in full." My throat closed. "These aren't records?" I murmured. "They're receipts." Creed closed the book and exhaled through his nose like a man forcing down rage. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the horizon where the sky was beginning to turn the color of old blood. "I thought this place would be quiet enough to die in," he finally said. "But you brought a war to my doorstep." His tone wasn't angry. If anything, it was reverent. Like he'd just remembered what it meant to stand for something. Then we heard it. Hoofbeats. Far off, but fast. Sure, the kind of sound that didn't wander, the kind that hunted. They found us, Eliza said. I grabbed Alice's hand before she could cry out. Creed looked toward the east where dust curled into the air like smoke. 4 riders, maybe 5, closing in. We have to go, I whispered. Creed didn't move. Instead, he looked down at the grave he'd dug, the one meant to swallow his name without a trace, and something changed in his face. The sorrow didn't leave, but it sharpened, took shape, became purpose. He turned to me and said, "There's a root cellar behind the chapel ruins, hidden beneath the altar. Take the girls there. Don't come out until I say." I shook my head. "You'll be outnumbered. I've been outnumbered my whole damn life," he said. He handed me the journal. His fingers brushed mine for just a second, warm, calloused, steady, and that single touch sent something through me I couldn't name. Not desire, not yet, but something gentler and deeper. Something like trust. "If anything happens to me," he said, "make sure this makes it to the capital. There's a newspaper office in El Paso. Ask for Whit Barnett." I nodded. Then Eliza grabbed his wrist. "Don't die for us," she said. Creed knelt to meet her eyes. "You gave me something to fight for. That is more than I had this morning." And that was when I realized he wasn't just standing at the edge of a grave anymore. He was guarding it, like a lion in front of a den. I led the girls down the trail behind the chapel. The cellar was where we used to store communion wine and coffins waiting for burial. Now it would hold children clinging to the last inch of safety in a world gone wicked. Before I ducked beneath the hatch, I looked back. Creed stood silhouetted against the orange sky, the wind lifting his coat like a prophet's robe. His hand rested near the pistol on his hip. He didn't look scared. He looked resurrected. And I remember thinking, what kind of man waits all his life to die, only to choose at the very last moment to live for someone else? There wasn't time to pray. Not with the sky bleeding lavender and gold. Not with the wind still carrying the scent of fresh dug earth. We'd buried a man that morning, one who'd once enforced the system we were now daring to defy. And by sundown, we'd be deciding if the grave was meant for him or for all of us. Creed stood ahead of me, the last of the sunlight, casting his shadow long and firm across the dust. He looked like a man who'd already died once and found no reason to be afraid of doing it again. I clutched the leather-bound journal to my chest like a second heartbeat. Behind me, the girls barely breathed. I could feel their fear like threads wrapping around my spine. Then we heard it. First came the hooves thudding low like a drumbeat at the edge of something sacred. Then came the laughter, thin, mean, sharp as bone. One rider crested the ridge, then another, then 6, then 10. They moved like a pack of coyotes slicing through the stillness, and there at the head was the man he'd never met, but always feared, Merritt Kane. He wore a red neckerchief, loose around his throat, the color of violence disguised as charm. His horse kicked up dust like fire, and he sat tall, like the world owed him thanks for the hell he brought with him. Even without words, I felt it. He was the man from Dead Man's Hollow, the one the girls had whispered about when they thought I was asleep. And he was here to take them back. Creed didn't move. Not a blink, not a twitch. The only thing that shifted was the air between them, charged like the breath before lightning. "Evening, Kane," Creed said. His voice was low like gravel rolled smooth by water. Kane smirked. "Didn't think I'd find you this far west." Figured you'd crawled back to the railroad and begged for scraps. Creed's reply was simple. I'm not your hound anymore. That silence that followed it was the kind that made your ears ring, the kind that warned you something sacred was about to be broken. Kane nodded toward the girls. They belong to me, property of the state. Governor signed it himself. That word property burned. These were not cattle. These were children. And suddenly, every broken doll, every scar on their small bodies, every nightmare they'd mumbled through in their sleep came roaring back in my mind. Creed's voice didn't shake. Not anymore. They're under my protection. Kane gave a low chuckle, mean and empty. You and what army? Then something happened. A voice rose behind us, old but thunder steady. Him and us. I turned stunned. Reverend Ezra stepped forward, shotgun resting across his broad shoulders like a sermon in steel. And behind him the town. I saw them. Dozens. Maybe more. Blacksmiths. Washwomen. Ranch hands. The man who sold me peaches just last week. Even old man Crandall dragging his wooden leg like a war drum. They had no rifles, most of them, but they had presence. And silence. And resolve. I looked at Kane. For the first time, his smirk trembled. You'd raise arms for a washed-up outlaw and a bunch of orphans, he hissed. Reverend Ezra didn't flinch. No, we'd raise souls. You don't get to unmake what we're trying to mend. Kane's eyes narrowed. This is suicide. Creed took a step forward. You can ride down that ridge and forget you ever saw us. Or you can draw and this dust'll remember your name longer than any gravestone. Kane stared at him. For a beat, the world held its breath. Then he spat cursed and turned his horse. This ain't over, he muttered. You're right, Creed said. It's just beginning. The riders vanished, trailing dusk and failure behind them. I collapsed to my knees, breath catching like a child's sob. Creed caught me with one arm. His body was worn and warm and alive. You all right? He asked. I nodded, but inside, everything was rearranged. We hadn't just defended a handful of girls. We had buried something else in that grave today, fear maybe, or silence, or the lie that said we were too small to matter. That night, we didn't light a fire, but I lay between the girls, my journal beneath my cheek, and listened to their soft breathing. I stared up at the sky and whispered, Here lies a man who quit. Then I added, But here stands a girl who won't. The morning after the standoff tasted of dust and promise. Creed was gone by sunup. I found his shovel propped against the well, the same one he used to bury the past. Its wood was worn, darkened, with calloused hands and decisions no man should have to make. Tied around the handle was a strip of cloth, the same checked blue-eyed, stitched into my own apron. A silent message. He had left it behind, or left it to me. I stood with it in hand when Deputy Halverson rode in. He didn't bring law. He brought paper with Seal's signatures and the cold breath of bureaucracy. His horse was spotless. His badge was polished. He dismounted without a word, handing a folded document to Reverend Ezra, who read it twice and didn't blink. They want the girls relocated, Ezra muttered, to county facilities in Carson, then split among institutions across the territory. My stomach clenched. The sun beat down, but I felt the chill in my spine. The girls were behind me, hiding under the porch, their little fingers curling over the edge of the wood like roots clinging to soil. Halverson spoke only once. This isn't a home. It's a liability. Ezra's hand twitched. I saw it. The way he wanted to punch the man, to grab him by that stiff collar and remind him this town had once forgotten how to feel, until 5 girls showed up in tattered dresses and reminded us. But he didn't. because some men don't shout when they should. That was my job now. I stepped forward, Creed's shovel in my grip, my heart in my throat. No one's taking them, I said, voice cracking once, then firming like a fence post hammered into place. They're not paper. They're not cargo. They're not yours. Haverson raised a brow. You a registered guardian? No, I said. I'm a girl with a shovel, and a town that just remembered how to care. The crowd behind me was quiet then stirring. Over 50 souls, blacksmiths, midwives, drunks, dreamers, the whole mixed stew of Thornbrook began stepping out of their doorways. Not one held a gun. Not one needed to. Ezra walked beside me, his coat brushing mine. Justice doesn't always wear a badge, he said softly, almost to himself. Sometimes she wears braids and boots too big. Then I felt it. A small hand in mine. I looked down. Emma. The littlest, barefoot hair a mess, freckles dotting her cheeks like stars. She was holding something my old journal, the one I kept hidden in the floorboard under my bed. She'd found it, read it. I want to stay, she whispered, with you. And just like that, the shovel grew heavier, not from weight, from meaning. I didn't remember walking forward, just that Halverson backed up one step, then another. The crowd closed in, not with rage, but with something more dangerous to men like him witnesses. He tucked the order back into his jacket. You'll be hearing from Carson, he muttered, mounting his horse with all the pride of a skunk crawling into a boot. Ezra nodded. I hope they send someone with ears. Halverson rode off. The dust took a long time to settle. That night, I sat alone on the chapel steps. The girls had finally fallen asleep, bellies full, hearts quiet. I kept the shovel beside me like a rifle, like a promise. Above stars blinked like the eyes of old women watching from another world. I opened my journal. Pages once filled with longing now burned with something different, conviction. I wrote the names of each girl, one on every page, and beside them, not their pasts, their futures. Emma Teacher, Rosie Weaver, June Healer, Tally Mapmaker, Little Fern Dreamer. I didn't know if any of it would come true. But Creed once told me, hope ain't a prophecy. It's a hammer. You don't wait for it, you swing it. So I did. I turned the last page and wrote one more name, Clara, the girl who stayed. They say some trees remember. Ours did. The cottonwood still stood just beyond the rise where the wind leaned in and whispered names it had no right to know. That morning, the sun cut through the branches like a benediction. And the veil, Mama's veil, still danced there, snagged on a crooked limb, soft and white as breath. 17 years it had waited, for what I didn't know. Maybe for me to see it not as grief, but grace. We buried Merritt Kane at dawn. Thorne dug the grave with his own hands. Said it was a matter of honor, though his face said more something like reckoning. The wooden marker I carved myself. Here lies a man who could not listen. Thorne didn't object. Maybe he thought it fair. The town changed after that. You don't kill a snake without stirring the nest, and sure enough, there were men who still whispered behind their whiskers. But Creed's cowardice had cracked something open. Folks began to remember they had spines. The tavern closed, the church filled, the girls started school. Miss Lucille herself came back from Carson City to teach again, and me, I stayed. I didn't plan to. I'd packed a satchel more than once, dreaming of St. Louis, of books and buildings, and the kind of love that didn't taste like ash. But those 5 girls, Letty with her stubborn chin, Mercy with her fits of laughter, and little June, who still clung to her headless doll like it was a compass. They looked at me like I mattered more than escape. I taught them to read from Mama's old journal. We read out loud under the cottonwood some evenings, my voice cracking on words about hope and storms and the shape of forgiveness. Thorn came around slow and careful, like he didn't believe in second chances, even if they knocked on his door with a smile. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't need to. He built a well behind the old chapel, deep and clean. Said it was for the town, but I saw the way his eyes followed us when we passed. That man who once guarded Cain's dirt now watered our roots. He never asked for my hand, not proper-like, but one day he handed me a carved wooden box with a compass inside. Said, "You can still leave Clara. I just hope you know where home is now." I kissed him for the first time then, not out of pity, not out of longing, but because my heart had finally stopped running. I took the veil down myself that spring, sewed its torn edges with thread. I spun from hairbrush wisps and patience. I wore it not as a bride, but as a daughter, a sister, a woman who'd bled and clawed and chosen to stay. I wore it the day we planted a new tree beside Mama Sony for the girls to sit beneath when I'm long gone. Some nights I still dream of fences stained red. I wake with my heart galloping, sweat slicking my neck like rain. But then I hear June snoring, or Letty humming that old hymn, and I remember we made it through. Not clean, not unbroken, but through. And that counts for something. I reckon folks will forget Merritt Kane. That's how the world is, fast to judge, quicker to forget. But maybe they'll remember Clara Lynn, not as a girl with dirt on her knees and sorrow in her chest, but as the woman who stood up when standing up meant everything. I still walk out to that tree sometimes, touch the bark, listen. The wind sings different now. Not in Mama's voice, but something close. I like to think it's the girls grown and brave, calling my name from a future I helped plant. I like to think the tree remembers me, not for the blood I ran from, but the roots I dared to put down. And if someone ever asks, whose blood was that on our fence, I'll smile and answer softly, it was mine. But it bloomed. Life doesn't hand us justice, we forge it. Clara's story isn't just about a girl in the West. It's about every one of us who has ever stood at a crossroads between fear and integrity. Through grief, betrayal, love, and redemption, we watched her rise not by fighting fire with fire, but by choosing courage over comfort, mercy over vengeance, and truth over silence. In a world still divided by power judgment and fear of change, this tale reminds us systems don't shift from the outside, they transform from within by those brave enough to break the silence. For us today, that might not mean holding a shovel in a dusty town square, but it does mean speaking up for what matters, healing what we've buried, protecting those no one else dares to. So ask yourself, where in your life is something worth standing up for? And what legacy are you planting under your own cottonwood tree? Because some stories don't end in history books, they begin in our daily choices. You've just heard one powerful story, but many more remain untold. Click to discover more raw, gripping, deeply human tales from the Wild West.